What's up, guys? We're gonna do a little spring bait breakdown, and this is gonna be one of the weapons that Ron's gonna talk about. If you didn't see the video I did a while back with Jay Beffa, he kind of broke down his pre-spawn, spawn, and post-spawn baits, and now Ron's gonna do the same thing. It's really cool to learn how different people approach, you know, the spring season and some of their weapons that they choose. I don't want to say weapons, but some of the baits that they choose, because everybody's got a few different tricks up their sleeve. So Ron's kind enough to gonna break it down for us. Let's go, man. I'm excited to see what you got for me, man.
Right. And we'll talk about this in a minute.
Okay.
Okay. And the stuff I talk about is not in any particular order. And when I talk about a bait, I'll try to go into a little pretty specifically as to why I'm throwing what I'm throwing, and why they're a confidence bait of mine. But when you talk about, you know, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, you know, that we're not very far from entering that period, even though we're just getting rid of ice on our lakes. You know, we're almost to March. Days are getting longer. We're coming up on a full moon, and those fish know what time of year it is. So it's not too early to start thinking about this stuff. You always want to be ahead of the fish. I'm very often been guilty of being behind the fish, and that can cost you on the water. But the first thing I'll talk about is the jig, and that's obviously a 12-month-a-year bait, but it has I have special confidence in that bait in the periods that we're talking about, and specific, and now all different colors and whatnot work. But when we're in the beginning of that period and the water's cold, one thing that doesn't get enough credit is this basic black jig. Something about just straight black in cold water will get a bite. I don't know why, but it does, and it always has. And then as the water warms up, I'll play with colors more. But this is my confidence go-to. You can tell how beat up that is. You know, I've been catching fish on this recently. Just that's a 3/8 ounce jig. It happens to be DNL. This is kind of a finesse jig, and I'm throwing that on 15-pound test. And that it's very versatile. I can fish that in 3 or 4 feet of water. I can fish this in 20 feet of water. It's very, very versatile. And then the other thing I do is I'll tip that with an old style piece of pork. And this is actually a jar, haven't opened it yet, from before Uncle Josh went out of business. They are making them again, and that's a good thing because I'm almost out of them.
You made a pretty hefty purchase, though.
I bought a lot of them when I found out Uncle Josh was going out. I was like, oh my God. And so I bought a bunch. I was telling Gabe before we started shooting the video that I used to get a pint of pork at Christmas, and that was my favorite Christmas gift. For those old schoolers who remember the pint of pork, you go into Dunn's, and on the shelf they'd just be lined up, whichever color you wanted. So a number 11 pork chunk, 3/8 ounce jig, and then also a piece of power worm on the shank. And that's important too, especially with pork, because it'll keep the pork from rolling over your hook. It will also sometimes allow the fish to hold on to the bait a little bit longer, which is really important in the spring, because in cold water, you don't always get that real aggressive thump. But if you take a jig with that piece of worm on the shank and hold it, it's soft. And I think that, coupled with the pork, it's just really conducive to a fish holding on to the bait. I caught a fish on that jig yesterday. out here in Egypt. So
talk a little bit about your rod and reel setup.
yeah, for this slider jig, 3/8 ounce, and I will go up to half, depending on the situation. But I want a slow fall in cold water, so usually it's the 3/8. I've just got your standard 7 foot. This happens to be a Falcon Cara, and this is I think this is a 6 power. Yeah, 6 power. So it's got pretty light tip, really. It's not overly. It's not a pool cue by any means. It's got a little give to it. And with just 15-pound test, I don't want to be throwing a pool cue anyway. And this is a casting situation. I'm casting. I'm not so much flipping. Although I will pitch if I'm on a weed edge, or if I see a blowdown, I will pitch. But this is mostly just for casting a finesse style jig and working those 45-degree banks and secondary points and stuff like that we focus on this time of year. Really, this is a money setup right here. I don't go to the lake without this. That's probably number one. Now to add to that, like Gabe was saying, check out his video with Jay Beffa. Jay talks about some crankbaits and some other things that are spot on. So I'm not going to hit some of that stuff and try and give you some additional stuff that I use, but the jig would be at the top of that list for sure. Next thing I'll talk about, I know this is one of Gabe's favorites, is a big thumper spinnerbait.
And by the way, I think I'm officially going to call that the Thunder Thumper. So shout out to John Moore's Custom Baits. He kind of threw that name at me the other day. And you guys had a lot of good names, but that one just kind of sticks in my brain, and I can remember it. So we're going to go with the Thunder Thumper from now on, I think.
Yeah. One thing, this time of year, now we got all these fancy graphs on the boat, and they're used every day I'm on the water. But the one thing, if there's one thing I could say to people who are starting to fish this time period of year, is don't always be dictated on where you fish simply by what you're seeing on your graph. This is the time of year to start using your eyes and your senses, because the fish are moving towards areas where maybe you're not going to see them on your electronics. Watercolor, pay attention to your watercolor. Water temperature is important, but it really is not the most important thing this time of year. It's a factor, but don't not fish an area because you think it's a degree or two too cold. But really pay attention to your visual cues this time of year. We had ice on our lake 2 days ago. Both fish I caught yesterday were in less than 10 feet of water. So, and I really think those fish are fish that know what time of year it is. So those are really important. And that really plays into how you throw the jig, or this bait here, the thumper spinnerbait. When you get a situation early spring where you've got some dirty water, and bass are bass, whether it's 40-degree water or it's 80-degree water, they react to their environment really pretty similar, in a similar way. In dirty water, they tend to be shallow and cover oriented. And when fish are in dirty water and are shallow, even though it's cold this time of year, you can catch them on a big thumper spinnerbait. That one's a 1/2 ounce, I believe. I think that's a number 7 blade, I think. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's right up my alley, man. I like that.
Yeah. And I'll throw that from a 1/2 ounce to an ounce, just depending on, a lot of times it depends on what type of trailer you want to put on it. And I don't get too crazy with colors. White's good. White and chartreuse, or black. If it's really dirty water, black. There's one black and orange. That's a really good example. I'll throw that one a lot. I think that one's a 1/2. This one might be a 3/4. Here's one that's a good solid 3/4. Good thin wire for vibration. those will catch, and they'll catch big fish. As you can go back and look at some of Gabe's videos, he's caught some really big fish on a spinnerbait like that. Trailers, two things on trailers. One, depends on what type of profile you're trying to put in the water. If you're wanting a big profile, maybe there's a lot of, this time of year, the bait is as big as it's going to be, the big gizzard shad and whatnot. So if you're trying to match that, you know, a big swim bait on the back, or not, you know, depending on what you want. And then the other thing that does, a trailer or absence of a trailer, it will affect on where that bait rides in the water column. I oftentimes use this as a trailer. A number 11 pork chunk will work very well on the back of a spinnerbait, just like it does on a jig. And what it does is it provides buoyancy without a whole lot. You don't want a whole lot of action this time of year in cold water. The pork rind does a really good job of that, and plus no one throws it anymore, so you'll be the only one throwing it. But if you use a swim bait on the back of one of these, try to use one that's a little stiffer with a little bit less tail action, and I think day in and day out that'll be better. But that's a great dirty water situation, or if you have a lot of wind in an area, that'll produce fish.
Yeah, anything that breaks up the surface,
Yeah.
is a spinnerbait deal, no matter what time of the year. But
Yeah.
a lot of times it's kind of overlooked in the real cold water period. And I've caught fish about 42 to 43 degrees is when I'm starting to look at that big spinnerbait. And like Ron said, stain or wind, but stain I think is very critical when throwing that big thumper blade. And 2 feet of visibility for me, about 2 feet of visibility or less. And it'll carry over when it starts getting a little bit clearer. You'll still catch some fish if you've got some wind mixed in there. But I typically get away from that if the water starts getting clearer. And that kind of goes for any time of the year too. If you live on a lake that's got, like for instance, Wren Lake or some of these lakes that typically have a lot of stain, that big spinnerbait can play a lot. You know, it can play throughout the year for the most part.
The next bait I wanted to talk about, and this is a bait that quite frankly hasn't played as much for me lately, but I'm thinking that this particular bait has a really good opportunity this early spring. And this is a man shadow. And then before I get into the man shadow, a soft plastic jerk bait, period, this time of year will catch fish. It can be, the water can be as cold as it can be, and a yum dinger or a fluke, or you know, depending on how you're wanting to present a bait, will catch fish this time of year. And the yum dinger, rigging it wacky style, I mean, that's, everyone knows that on, you know, when they're really shallow. And don't forget about the soft plastic jerk baits this time of year.
And we got a shad kill too, which is something this part of the country really experienced about 14 days of below freezing temperatures, and we've had ice on all the lakes. And fortunately, Lake of Egypt, where we're at today, is a power plant lake. Even though they've cut a lot of the production, it's still the first lake that I know of that's opened back up, and we got some water, some open water, and there's a shad kill going on. Yeah. So the soft jerk bait is something that can really play in a shad kill.
Yeah. Now this particular soft jerk bait, it's called the Man Shadow, and they're still in production. But I was taught this bait by one of my mentors back in the 80s, Jay Zapp on Cedar Lake. And we had a shad kill one year back in the 80s. Jay was always way ahead of his time. And we were taking this Man Shadow and fishing the shad kill, and we destroyed them. I don't know how many fish we caught, but I learned a lot, and we were there wasn't a whole lot of people that were up to speed on it yet. But here's the deal on the Man Shadow. I'll get this one I've already been on a hook and fished with. I'll figure out how to use a Ziploc bag. Nope.
Well, as long as you can use your electronics, well, you don't need to know how to open a Ziploc bag.
Here's a full one. I think they're 5.5 inches. And the key to this shadow is how it falls. Which, you know, you've seen a dying shad kind of doing this and kind of fluttering down. This bait is the best imitator of that I know. You know, short of a spoon or something like that. But what I'll do is I'll take this and then I bite the head off. Okay. That gives it a flat surface for it to, it makes it much more erratic in the water with that flat front. And then I'll rig it on a long hook. You want the hook back here a little bit. Okay, and I've got a weight. I've got a nail weight right in here. But the key is when you put this on the hook, you do not want it straight. You want to make sure that you give this bait a little bit of an arch. So I'll bury the tip of the hook so that it's got an arch like that. And the reason for that is when this bait settles in the water, and I've got that nail weight towards the front, it will do a circular dive. Okay, the nose will go down and it'll do a circular dive, exactly like a dying shad. It's when they're on this bait, it can be really, really, really effective. And like Gabe said, we have a shad kill in Southern Illinois this year. Well, probably across 3/4 of the country we have a shad kill. I had a friend that commented on a Facebook post yesterday. He's from Oklahoma, and his lakes are still frozen in Oklahoma. So I feel pretty fortunate to be able to fish here in Southern Illinois today. But that is an excellent imitator of a dying shad when it's rigged that way. But the key really is make sure you rig that with an arch in it. Otherwise, it'll still sink, but it's very slow. With that arch in it, it goes nose down, and it does a circular spiral down.
And you just got an offset worm hook in that? Or what kind of hook you got in there?
Yeah, just a long shank offset worm hook. And these hooks used to actually come in the packages with the shadow. So just a really long shanked offset worm hook. Yeah, you want to make sure you have one that's big enough to push that hook point back here for just as far as hooking up the fish.
So you're sticking with just shad-based colors for the most part.
Yeah, I don't mess around. If I'm fishing a shad kill, I want it to look like a shad. So there, that's the deal. I don't. If they're not biting it, it's not because it's not the color. It's just because they're just not biting it. But that's something you won't hear everywhere. But that's a trick that can put some fish in your boat. One other little, I can't believe I'm going to tell people this. One other trick. Okay, this is during the shad kill, so this is probably more pre-spawn, just timing wise. When the fish move up and they get on the bed, you can take this bait, and I'll use a shorter shanked hook, but you can rig this bait wacky style and fish it like you would fish like a yum dinger or whatever. But what's different about this bait is, like, if you throw it over a bed or something like that and twitch it, it will back up. This bait will back up if you work your rod right and give it the slack properly. This bait will actually back up. It's kind of like the old banjo minnow. That is something that the fish don't see every day. And I shouldn't have said that.
Well, I'm glad it's the $20 that I gave you to do this video. I said, I want details. I want tips.
Yeah, no.
That's cool.
No, that'll put an extra fish in the boat for somebody somewhere. And the other thing, if someone fishes with me for a while, they're going to notice if everyone's doing number 1, I'm doing number 1A. Or if everyone's doing number 2, I'm doing 2B. I always like to be a half step off especially when you consider the fishing pressure that these lakes are getting lately with COVID and all that, I don't like to go down the bank behind somebody doing the exact same thing that he was doing and the boat before him was doing. And sometimes that's as simple as using a pork trailer, or using a different soft plastic jerk bait, or a deeper diving jerk bait, or something a little different. And I think that will be more important the next couple of years than even the years past, just because of fishing pressure. So I think things will get back to normal fishing pressure wise, but right now, just is what it is.
Man, that's some juice right there.
Yeah,
that
that's
is
good
some
stuff.
juice, folks. He just let the cat out of the bag on that.
On that.
He's going to get a few phone calls after this video drops, I'm sure. Some nasty text. So, you got one more technique, right?
Yeah, I got one more.
This is another one that not a lot of people think about either, man. He's dropping some goods.
Yeah, this is, again, don't let cold water steer you away from this bait. Now, you notice I got jerk baits tied on up there that I'm going to throw today, just like everyone else that's going to be at the lake today, and I got the jig tied on. But this is a bait that in the spring, again, a lot of these baits are 12 months a year, but for some reason, you know, baits get slotted. And Carolina rig. Carolina rig has kind of become old school. A lot of guys have forgotten about it, and myself included. I get where there's so many things to do, you forget about it. But pre-spawn, and I'm talking late winter pre-spawn, and then all the way up to when they lock on, Carolina rig will catch some fish. The largest bass I've ever seen put in a boat, I was the net boy. God rest his soul, Dean Clark, my old partner on Little Grassy. We would throw Carolina rigs about this time of year on Little Grassy, and I actually saw 2 9s get put in the boat on a Carolina rig on Little Grassy, end of February, beginning of March, and I was the net boy on both of them actually. A couple basic things. You can fish this in 5 feet of water. You can fish this in 35 feet of water. The Carolina rig is one of the most versatile baits there are. You can finesse fish with the Carolina. You can finesse fish with a 1 ounce weight and put a little tiny hook back here in a crawler or something. I mean, there's no limit to the imagination with the Carolina rig. But when those fish start to stage on points and secondary points and channel bends, and it's a great way to cover water and put a bait in front of them that not everyone else is throwing. I like a standard lizard, green pumpkin with a little chartreuse tail, is about as good a color as there is. Now, early in the year, same concept as with the black jig, I will throw a very dark lizard. Especially on a cloudy day, I might go black with red glitter. But day in and day out in relatively clear water like we have in Southern Illinois, that green with a little chartreuse tail, you can't beat it. Now I've made this leader, probably when I tied this up, I made this leader a little bit too long. I usually like a little bit shorter leader, maybe about in here, which is what, 2.5 feet, something like that. I can shorten that if I get to fishing and don't like it. But the key here, I'm using braid for my main line. I've got 40-pound braid for feel. I've got a egg sinker with the fat end towards the bottom, so when I'm dragging it through rocks, the thick parts won't get hung up as much. Bead, standard, standard deal on a Carolina rig. But what's different maybe is that is monofilament. That is 17-pound green XT, the same stuff we used to all throw. And the reason I throw monofilament on the Carolina rig is monofilament floats. And now this isn't going to be way up here off the bottom when I'm dragging it, but it will. In my mind, that bait's probably a foot off the bottom, maybe. Or fluorocarbon, it's going to be a lot closer to the bottom. So that the monofilament facilitates in getting that lizard up off the bottom. You don't want to use too heavy a hook. Again, just a standard worm hook, offset worm hook. And I use as small a hook as I think I can get away with. Again, facilitating that bait getting up off the bottom. The other nice thing about with this braid, you know, when you set the hook, there's no give, so that little bit of monofilament also is a little bit of a shock absorber. And then I've got that on a 7-11 pretty heavy duty rod. You want a long rod when you're Carolina rig fishing because you've got all this line out there and everything that you're setting the hook into, and the long rod helps with that sweeping type of hook set. But that right there will put some fish in the boat in the spring. Not everybody's throwing it. You got some points that got a couple stumps on it. I can't think of a better way to present a bait. You know, they may not want to chase a crankbait yet, but that old lizard drags by them, and you know it's hard for them not to grab that.
Just a real natural presentation.
Very natural, and again, probably a half step off of what a lot of guys are doing. A lot of the old guys are doing it, but there's a lot of guys that don't throw this anymore, and I get a chuckle. I watch that Bass Talk Live, and that Matt Pangrecht you had on your show, he's always laughing about the old guys throwing the Carolina
Well, that's what I was going to say. I was getting ready to say Frank Scalish is throwing a Carolina rig for sure.
Yeah.
That's his go-to
Yeah.
bait. I mean, he's a Carolina rig guy. Man, that was good stuff, Ron. I really appreciate it. Guys, watch this again, man. I'm telling you, there's a lot of good detail in there. A lot of little sneaky stuff, especially that jerkbait thing. That's really cool. That's something, that's come up a lot lately in some of our live streams and stuff, like the fluke. And I've gotten away from that. And man, that used to be my go-to bait, one of my go-to baits, but I just kind of got away from it because the fishing industry does such a good job of marketing new baits every year. I've got away from the, yeah, I mean, and you forget about those baits. The fish still bite those baits, and they most likely haven't seen them as much. So these are just little nuggets, especially the man shadow. That's really overlooked. But soft jerk baits are awesome in the spring. So that's all we got for you. Give me a thumbs up if you appreciate the content. And we're getting ready to go out in the water. I'm excited. We've been doing some video shoots in here. The sun's out. The wind's blowing just a little bit. But we got a nice low to mid 30s. It's supposed to get up close to 50. And I haven't been on the water in like 3 weeks, other than doing a little bit of ice fishing. So I'm super excited to get out there. Got any questions, please leave them in the comment section, and we'll do our best to get back with you and answer those. That's all we got. Ron, you got anything else to say? Or
no, I appreciate doing this, and talking about it. It gets you fired up to want to go, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does, man.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah.
So, all right, till next time.